Good morning, AP Euro people, and we are back ready to dive back into the wonderful world of Louis XIV, absolutism, and all things France. So we kind of got into yesterday, ending with the War of the League of Augsburg. And again, this idea of understanding that finally other countries are realizing we're not going to be France by ourselves. That's kind of what France and Louis was banking on. He fought each one of these little countries individually, encroaching and taking part of their land, smaller nations first, obviously, and then finally people realize, hey, this guy is really seriously upsetting the balance of power. We need to get in control of this. And so they joined and formed this League of Augsburg, in which other nations joined together. And again, remember yesterday we said Catholic and Protestants to fight against this rising power of France. And again, not really successful because this is going to continue. On page 9, we have the War of Spanish Succession. So secession means who's going to get the throne when the king dies, and every king has to declare his succession, who's next in line for the throne. So the cause of the War of Spanish Succession, meaning who is going to get the throne on after the current king of Spain dies. So the cause, the will of Charles II, gave all of his and the will, that means his will, that when he dies, gave all of his Spanish territories to the grandson of Louis XIV. So that means Louis XIV's grandson would be the king of Spain as well as the king of France. And you hopefully can understand how upsetting that could be to the rest of Europe. That's two ginormous countries under the rule of one king. For Louis, it's the culmination of his absolutist powers. I'm not going to get to control Spain, but my grandson is going to have the throne of France and the throne of Spain, two gigantic countries that touch each other, that take up almost the entire coast of Europe. That is enormous. That is power. European powers feared that Louis would consolidate the thrones of France. Yeah, you think? Thus creating a monster power. And this sends shock all throughout Europe. And they finally decided we really have to do something. And so number 2, a grand alliance. So the War League of Augsburg, if you look, those are really little teeny countries, right? The only big one is really Spain. But this grand alliance is all the big countries. It is now England, it's Dutch, the Holy Roman Empire, Brandenburg, Portugal, Savoy. These giant nations all say, we've got to battle against this powerhouse of Louis XIV and what he's trying to build. Battle of Bildam, turning point in the war, again, a couple of defeats. But what we need to know out of the War of Spanish Succession is that bottom Treaty of Utrecht. And this Treaty of Utrecht, as you see in 4A, most important treaty between the Treaty of Westphalia and the Treaty of Paris in 200 years. And it is essentially important, especially to combating the power and the spreading expansion of France. So maintains the balance of power, and it ends, this is why the Treaty of Utrecht is so important, is 4A, that second bullet point, ends the expansion of Louis XIV. This closes the door on him and says, you can't go past these long withheld boundaries of France. You can't keep expanding into other people's territory. Spanish successions were partitioned, meaning divided off, and the biggest winner of the Treaty of Utrecht is Britain. Britain is going to get the slave trade, the right to send one English ship into Spain's New World Empire, gained the Spanish territories of Gibraltar. Guess who still owns Gibraltar in 2020? That'd be Great Britain. Great Britain really begins its empire, this gigantic thing it's going to build, the biggest empire in the whole entire world, after the Treaty of Utrecht, and they start to gain these territories. Belgium will be given to Austria. Netherlands, again, is a buffer. On page 10, although Louis the grandson was enthroned in Spain, the unification of Spain and the dynasty of Bourbon dynasty prohibited. They can't do that. So they couldn't overturn the will of somebody, right? Charles can give the throne to to Louis's grandson. But what they can say is those two thrones cannot be combined. On page 10, big giant box around F. The cost of Louis XIV's wars, they are tremendous to his country and to the people of his country. It destroys the economy. When you go to war for that long, it destroys an economy in so many different ways. There aren't enough people to participate in the economy because everyone's off fighting wars. It's not that there was wars in France. Most of these wars take place on foreign land, not in France. So they're not destroying the countryside. But the economy is a war economy, meaning everything is geared toward making war, which means you're not making normal things for people that they need to buy, like clothing or household items or beds or windows to put in your houses. So the economy is devastated by that. 20% of your people die. And most of that 20% is men between the ages of 15 and 40, which are the essential people that you need to build a growing nation. And that is detrimental. A huge, gigantic debt. Again, we talked about how expensive war is and that continuing of making war. And guess who pays for that? It's the poor people. It's the poor people who can't afford to pay anything else. The French government is bankrupt. They are absolutely bankrupt. They don't have any way to recoup all of those losses. And this is the beginning of these long baby steps that are going to happen in 1789 with the French Revolution. It takes that long to get there, but they're getting there. So that ends us with Louis XIV of this absolute building in France. So what you should get out before we move into Spain, what you should get out of absolutism in France is that is the place where absolutism flourishes. It's the place where the King of France is the most important absolutist ruler and runs France exactly as he sees fit. And that's the heart of an absolutist ruler. He builds Versailles as this Baroque embodiment of absolutism. Like it's the country that embodies absolutism. Okay, so now we're going to move to Spain. Again, this will probably be one of the last times in our notes that we have anything about Spain because they are on their decline and will be slowly eclipsed by both England, a really, really small nation, and France, its neighboring nation. So the golden age of Spain in the 16th century, we already looked at all of this. Ferdinand and Isabella, they go to the New World, they colonize the New World, they get wealthy by the New World. They too have this foundation of absolutism, and Spain's power is going to reach its height or its zenith under Philip II. Madrid becomes capital of Spain. He's going to build a palace. It's nowhere near what Versailles is, but it is the idea of absolutist power. He develops his command economy. Rituals of etiquette reinforce the king's power, and all those etiquettes are like you can't turn your back on the king, just certain little bits and pieces of things, like you can't start eating until the king eats. That's true everywhere where there's an absolutist king, like the same thing with Louis. You can't start eating until he eats. You can't get up from the table until he gets up from the table. You can't drink until he's had a drink. I mean, it's just a lot of rules reinforcing the power and the might of the king. So that's what they mean by the rituals of the court. And then, of course, we have that lovely Spanish Inquisition that are persecuting heretics, Jews, and Moors. So what brings this great and powerful Spanish economy built on all this gold and silver that they're getting from the New World? Well, let's look on the bottom of page 10, the decline of the Spanish economy in the 17th century. Spanish economy was hurt by the loss of their middle class. And we'll spend a lot of time talking about the middle class or lack thereof in European history, because the middle class is what drives nations. It's why if you pay any attention to political debates in the United States, everybody talks about the middle class. Presidents run on the fact that they are like the middle class, which none of them are because they're really, really wealthy. But they always want to make connections with the middle classes because this is what drives an economy. They're the middle group of people who do the work of a country. And so when you lose your middle class, or when your middle class is relegated to the side or not taken care of politically or economically, your nation's going to be in trouble. And that's what happens because just about everybody that they kicked out, the Moors and the Jews, that was their middle class. And so they don't have a middle class. The second part is their population shrinks. That's always a problem because all those populations, all the numbers of the population equal tax dollars. And when your tax dollars are reduced by your population, again, you're going to be in deep trouble. Spain's trade with its colonies is going to reduce 60%, mostly due to competition. So when they first go over there in 1492, there's nobody there. But as other countries become part of this new world trade, especially the English and the Dutch, who are much better at it than Spain, that competition is too powerful for them to overcome. Again, Spain is bankrupt. And I know it's difficult to think that a country is bankrupt, but when you think about the fact that what runs the country is the king's treasure box, and if there's nothing in that treasure box, there's no banks, there's no loans that the king of Spain can get from another bank. He is Spain, and just like Louis XIV, he is France. So he has to borrow from private people, and it's hard to borrow that much money from private individuals. National taxes hit the peasantry hard. The peasants cannot make up that type of income loss. Many peasants were driven from the countryside. Food production, and that I would underline that. When you cannot make enough food for your people to live, you're in serious trouble, big trouble. On page 11, inflation from the price revolution. So that one positive thing at the beginning of our course where we talked about the price revolution, the commercial revolution, that is great at the beginning of this when everybody's profiting. But as time goes by, the people that are going to be hurt are those poor people. The poor work ethic stunted economic growth. And as you read one of those assignments, you'll read what the Dutch see in the Spanish. Like they just don't have a work ethic. They take siestas right after lunch and they sleep and nobody's working and no one's. So that also will impact their lifestyle. The upper classes eschewed work. I mean, they don't do work. Like work? What do you mean work? They don't do work. And live a life of luxury. Like there's nothing going on. Like there's no problems. Noble titles were purchased, provided tax exemptions for the wealthy. So if you were nobility, you didn't pay taxes. So it's in your best interest to raise enough money to buy a title, and then you don't pay any taxes. So that's what's happening to their economy. It's collapsing, and it will continue to collapse. And in the 21st century, Spain's economy is still horrible. It's horrible. They've never, ever, ever really recovered from this time period because they didn't do anything to try and fix it. They had no revolution like Spain does. So they stay in a desperate economic state until today, September 30th, 2020, they are still in desperate straits. Politically and militarily, this one part that they were really strong, again, starts to decline. And it declines symbolically, not for real, but symbolically with the defeat of the Spanish Armada. They lose control of the ocean. And when you're a country that has a gigantic border on a coast and you lose control of that body of water to another country, you're in trouble. You're in big trouble. England's going to dominate the Atlantic Ocean. Poor leadership, Spain's defeat in the 30 Years' War, the Treaty of Pyrenees, which we're not really going to talk about, but it is, again, the decline of Spain. So while we have both France and Great Britain rising, Spain is slowly collapsing. All right, so now we're going to look at a little bit of art movement as we end this absolutist. So if we were to think of absolutism and we were to think of what visually represents absolutism, it would be Baroque. And on your one-pager with absolutism, if there's not, again, something about Baroque, there's a problem. Because this Baroque art movement is what defines absolutism. It's still Catholicism. It still represents that, but it's a tie-in with that type of artwork and majestic, gigantic displays of wealth. That's what it shows as well. Reflected the late age of absolutism. Begins in the Catholic Reformation to teach concrete emotional ways and demonstrate the power and the glory of the Catholic Church, as well as these absolutist leaders. It will eventually spread, but at the top of page 12, the characteristics of Baroque are to overwhelm the viewer. These things are supposed to be so grand that you just stand there in awe of many things. How somebody made this, that's always for me. Like, how did somebody actually create this thing? It's overwhelmingly beautiful. Grandeur, emotion, movement, spaciousness, these things are giant. And Versailles, again, typifies Baroque architecture. Again, it's very important. You've got a big giant list, again, of Baroque. The bottom of the page, this is really a review of what we looked at in our end of our last chapter with Catholic Reformation. Strong sense of emotion, color important, designed to give a personal experience. So when you look at it, you see something personal. On page 13, again, we have Caravaggio and Rubens and some of the paintings there. I don't think there were any test questions on our last Reformation test about Baroque, but there will be a bunch on this one. There'll be a lot of test questions about Baroque. On the bottom of page 13, we have a Dutch style because the Dutch are not Catholic, right? So we have our Catholic Reformation Baroque-ish. That's Caravaggio, Rubens, and then we move to the Dutch style of Baroque, which is a little bit different. Does not fit that Baroque style of trying to overwhelm. Reflected, and this is what we're looking at. Please look at 1B. This is significantly important. Reflected the religious toleration of secular objects and reflected the material wealth of the Dutch. And that's what we're looking at. That's girl with a pearl earring. It's the bottom Vermeer, woman with a water jug. The greatest of all Baroque, although he doesn't really fit, Rembrandt would be Rembrandt, Vermeer, all of these people. We also on page 14 have French classics. And again, these are our classic painters trying to rationally organize, achieve harmony and balance, focus on classical scenes, focus on landscape, not really Baroque, but it's all there. And then last, one of my favorites is Baroque music. And most of you are all very familiar with Baroque music, even if you don't know it's Baroque music. Believe that the text should dominate the music, the lyrics. More important, Baroque composers developed the modern system of major and minor tonalities. Bach is our greatest composer. Wrote dense phonographic structures, a variety of genres. Handel writes the Messiah, which everybody knows from Christmas time. So that is our end of absolutism in Western Europe. And I'm going to briefly start on our look at, you know what? No, I'm going to stop because that's 18 minutes. All right, I'm going to stop recording. Those of you listening to this, Kaylee brought up yesterday that I did not give you the worksheet that goes along with the DBQ. We're going to talk about that tomorrow in class. So I'll give you that worksheet in class. I think that's why I didn't give it to you, because I didn't want you to start on it. So we will go over that DBQ in class tomorrow. Please make sure you take your chapter 11, chapter 12 quizzes. There are 2 of them. There is not an access code, but you do need to take it with the lockdown browser, which I think means you've got to shut down your computer and enter that through the app. Ask Mr. Woodsmall, is there not some other way to do that? But as of now, that's to him and to me, unless some of you know a different way, that's the only way to do that. So have a great Wednesday. Enjoy the fall weather. I think it's supposed to be fall-like all day. It was kind of nippy when I came in this morning. So enjoy your day. Email me with any questions. Please make sure you take those quizzes, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye, guys.